Dereck Michael Brock was living the dream. He bought a beautiful home on a mountaintop in Red Feather Lakes, Colorado. And one of the things he looked forward to the most was being surrounded by the wilderness. Nestled in the rugged outdoors, he owned a taxidermy business and was quite content with his life. Until he unknowingly crossed paths with a woman who would later be known as nothing more than his killer. Claiming to love Mike, to always be there for him, to take care of him and protect him, but the fate she was quietly planning for him, plotting for him, would be one that would haunt his family for the rest of their lives and make everyone else who ever come in contact with her question their own tragedies that somehow always seem to involve her. When pure evil is personified, it takes on the face of none other than Cynthia Wilkinson. And when that evil takes away a beloved father of two and friend to everyone who knew him, lives are forever crushed. This is the case of Dereck Michael Brock, and this is Gone in a Blink. Hello, true crime fans. I'm your host, Heather.
And I'm Danielle.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 5 of Gone in a Blink. Today's case is over the murder of Dereck Michael Brock. And the details of this case are pretty graphic. So if you're the squeamish type, you may want to skip through some of this. I had the privilege of sitting down to talk with Michael Brock's ex-wife, Betty Belcher. Her story is both heartbreaking and incredibly shocking. This is part 1 of a 2-part episode, so if you're ready, let's jump right into it. Dereck Michael Brock, or Mike as everyone called him, and his wife Betty built a life together in Gloucester, Virginia in 1982.
My name is Betty Belcher. I was married to Mike in 1981 until 1989. We have one daughter together, Gail Marie Brock. We were in business together. Mike was a award-winning taxidermist here in the state of Virginia and in a couple of other states. He was an avid sportsman, and that was his passion, taxidermy and the wildlife. And we had, like I said, we had one daughter together, Gail Marie Brock, but he has another daughter from a previous relationship, and her name is Jessica Brock, and she lives here in Gloucester as well as Gail Brock.
Betty gave birth to their daughter Gail, and life was good up until around 1989 when Mike's marriage to Betty came to an end.
So after you and Mike divorced, where did he go? Is that when he went out to Colorado, or did he stay around your area?
He continued to live in Gloucester for a number of years, and then he left Gloucester and he was in Montana a short period of time, and then subsequently ended up in the state of Colorado.
Mike hung around West Virginia for several more years before moving west, ultimately ending up in Colorado. He was an avid outdoorsman, and so he bought his dream home on top of a mountain in Red Feather Lakes, Colorado. Sometime between 2010 and 2012, Mike Brock met a woman by the name of Cynthia Wilkinson. They began dating for a bit, and Cynthia had even somewhat moved in with Mike. However, that relationship wouldn't last, and she soon moved out. But the two remained close friends. A decision that would ultimately decide his fate and change his family's lives forever.
Do you know at what point he starts seeing Cynthia Wilkinson?
We believe, and some of this information is from her, but we believe they started dating like in maybe 2010 or 11, maybe possibly as late as 2012. They dated briefly and then broke up, and then they dated again, and then they just ended up being friends.
Was she living with Mike before his death?
Yeah, she lived with him while they were dating, but prior to his death, no, she was not living with him. He was living alone on a mountaintop in Red Feathers Lake, Colorado, which is in Fort Collins. He lived on a mountaintop. He had a very beautiful home up there on top of a mountain, and he had a garage there, and he was doing taxidermy work, and she was in the friendship state with him, and she was coming and going periodically, on visits.
So then, had Mike's kids that you know of ever met Cynthia in person?
No, never met her in person. Spoke with her on the phone, but that was it. Now, Cynthia had developed a very good relationship with Mike's aunt, Kathleen, in Kentucky. She had made visits there to Kathleen, and they had a very good phone friendship. But Kathleen was in her 90s when this friendship relationship started. Kathleen has dementia, so Kathleen was kind of being played and being given false information regarding Mike. Kathleen had a very, very good relationship with Mike. He was almost like a child to her. Her sister was actually Mike's mother, which is deceased.
By late 2021, Wilkinson had gotten married to a man by the name of Jesse Wilkinson, who was serving a life sentence in a Colorado prison for an unrelated murder.
I understand that Cynthia was married. Was she married at the time she was with Mike?
Yes, she met Jesse through some pen pal, whatever, I don't know, or from a mutual murderer, a friend of hers. And so she met Jesse. Jesse has been in prison, I think, since 2001. He goes up for parole in 2045. He is in prison for murder. He murdered a witness that was set to testify against him in a laundromat robbery, I believe. But she married Jesse in prison and was, making regular visits to Jesse in prison. And she passed Mike off as being a good friend, and, they were really good friends, and they had mutual friends. And so that's what Jesse believed, was that, Mike was a friend of hers.
The last time Mike's daughter Gail had seen her father was in 2015 when he had gone back to Virginia to visit her and her family. They had ended up getting into an argument before Mike headed back to his home in Colorado and hadn't spoken to each other for about a year. Then Gail began trying to reach Mike in 2016. She would call his cell phone, and Cynthia would always answer, giving Gail one excuse right after the other why Mike couldn't come to the phone. She would say things such as Mike had gone fishing, or he was out running errands and had forgotten his phone. So Gail would sometimes text her dad even, and it was later discovered that Cynthia would text back using Mike's phone, making it look like the texts were coming from Mike. So Gail really had no reason to believe that anything was wrong.
We believe that Kathleen was actually on the phone talking with Mike when the phone went dead, and no one ever heard from Mike after that.
Had Kathleen said something to you about that she was on the phone with him? Is that why you believe that, or what?
Yes, she said that she was on the phone talking to Mike, and she said, and the phone went dead, and she tried to call him back and never could get any answer, kept calling, never could get any answer. And then, of course, when she was able to get an answer, Cynthia was on the phone and started telling Kathleen all these stories about, well, Mike's gone out hunting, or Mike's gone out fishing. That was always the case. And see, by then she had Mike's phone in her possession, so she was able to text and do various things on the phone, which led everybody to believe that Mike was okay.
Okay. So your daughters had, or your daughter, I guess you two have one daughter together, and then you said he had another daughter from a previous relationship. So the girls would try to call their dad and never be able to get him on the phone, and
right.
Cynthia would answer and make up reasons why he wouldn't answer or why he couldn't come to the phone. And how long did that go on?
That went on. Mike came to Virginia in the end of 2015. And he came to visit, and he said he was going to be coming back. And then he left, and by everything that the investigators have gathered, Mike was murdered on April 21st of 2016. So before that, Gail had conversation with her dad on the phone. They got into a little bit of an argument, and you know, that's the way their relationship was. You know, they would have spats, and then they would talk, and everything would be fine. So she had this small argument with her dad on the phone, and that was it. So after that, it was just texting. And of course, Gail had no idea that she was texting Mike's phone, and Cynthia was doing all the talking. And Jessica would text Mike's phone or call and get the same story. Well, Mike's gone out on a hunting trip, or Mike's gone out on a guided trip.
Several years had gone by, and Mike's daughters, Gail and Jessica, believed their dad was in Colorado living his best life. So Mike's 90-year-old aunt, Kathleen, told the family that she was in constant contact, but things started getting extremely suspicious years later when they learned that it wasn't Mike that Kathleen had been in contact with. It was Cynthia Wilkinson.
In the interim of that, Gail was talking with Kathleen, which is Mike's aunt, and saying, you know, asking, have you talked to Mike? And, oh, yeah, she had talked to Mike, and Mike was sick. He had the flu, blah, 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 had all this stuff going on. Well, lo and behold, no one knew that Kathleen wasn't actually talking to Mike. She was talking to Cynthia. And no one knew at that time that Kathleen was entering into dementia.
Along with the dementia, she was talking to Cynthia, but really buying into everything Cynthia was telling her.
Yes, that was what all this was about. Cynthia, she had gotten Kathleen to be her best friend, and she was giving Kathleen all these stories about Mike. You know how Mike is. He doesn't want to talk. He's mad. He's had a bad day, blah, 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 but he says he loves you. And in that time frame from 2016 to 2020, she had swindled $1 million from Kathleen. She had gotten $1 million in cash from Kathleen. And every time Gail would talk to Kathleen, you know, and ask about Mike, yeah, Mike's doing okay, you know, he's just got back from a hunt, or, you know, it was always something, and nobody knew what had happened to Kathleen's mind until we were contacted by the Larimer County Sheriff's Department. And then that's when Gail found out, oh, my God, Kathleen has not really spoken to Mike. She's just been living through what Cynthia has told her. We were talking, Gail was talking to Kathleen, thinking Mike was fine. We were told Mike had COVID really bad. We were told Mike had to have heart surgery, but he was back on his feet, and he'd gone hunting and he'd gone fishing because he was an avid outdoorsman. And sometimes he would be gone, you know, on these hunts for a while. And so everybody was believing this, and it all led back to everybody believing that Kathleen was actually talking to Mike, and she wasn't.
So when your daughter and her sister figured out, okay, something is terribly wrong, and you learned that Kathleen hadn't actually been talking to Mike at all. So no one has really been in contact with Mike, only Cynthia. What was the next steps when they realized something's terribly wrong?
So in January of 2022, Gail, my daughter, got a phone call, and they said they were investigator Coleman with the Larimer County Sheriff's Department and Tyler Thomas with the Larimer County Sheriff's Department. They called Gail and asked her if her father was Mike Brock, and she said yes. And they wanted to know when she had last spoken to him, and she told him it had been a couple years, but he was in constant contact with Kathleen. But she had not spoken to him because they had an argument, and sometimes they had gone a couple years without talking. It was just that way, I mean, families do that. It's crazy, but that happens. So he told her that they had received a missing persons report for Mike and wanted to know, there again, if she had talked to him. She said no, but my Aunt Kathleen had talked to him and blah, blah, blah. And so they said, okay, we'll get back in touch with you.
Jesse reached out to authorities at the prison with some horrific news. He told investigators that he had good reason to believe that his wife had committed a murder 5 years earlier back in 2016 in Larimer County. And Jesse told them two different accounts of how Cynthia claimed Brock was killed. First, she said she had given Mike a lethal dose of narcotics. However, she later changed her story and said that another man tied Brock down and intentionally injected him with narcotics until he died. In the beginning, it was reported that police did not believe Jesse's story. Jesse felt he needed to turn Cynthia in because she was living with his parents at the time, and he was afraid that she would do something to them.
She went and had a visit with Jesse, and she told Jesse what she had done to Mike. And he couldn't believe it. And he got back to his cell and was thinking, my God, this woman is living with my mother and father. And Jesse's father dies. They just thought, he just died of natural causes because, he's a little bit elderly. And so Jesse's thinking, oh, my God, could this be something? And then Jesse's mother started getting sick. And so Jesse ended up contacting, I guess you would ask a deputy or whatever within the prison system to let them know you want to talk to the warden or you want to talk to whomever because you have information about a murder. And so Jesse told his story about what Cynthia had did, and they didn't believe him. The police officers didn't believe him. So this goes on for another whole year, and nobody's believing. And in the meantime, one of the people that was involved in the dismemberment of the body, Charles Gable, told the story to his parole officer. And the story didn't go anywhere. And nobody believed anything.
Charles Gable told the story to his parole officer, and it was probably very similar, I would assume, to the story that Jesse told the warden.
Yes.
And there's either no communication or they're just it sounds like they just blew it off. And
that's what it sounds like. They blew it off.
Here is a clip from Cynthia Wilkinson's interrogation.
You've always wanted to know who the anonymous source is.
Right.
It's Jesse.
Right.
And Jesse turned you in because he was afraid you were going to do to him what you did to Mike.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't want to lose his house, and he wanted to keep all of his family stuff together. That's why he turned you in. Because we know that you went and told Jesse about this
immediately,
a lot of times. So you told Jesse everything.
I did.
And Jesse has told us that you told him you had two versions how he died. You said that either Will beat him to death, just hear me out, or that he was overdosed from poison.
It was late in the evening our time because I was actually in bed. And my daughter called me, and I answered the phone, and she said, "Mom," she said, "Dad is dead." And she said, and Cynthia dismembered his body. And she couldn't catch her breath to speak. She said, "Can you call them, please?" And I got up and I called the Larimer County Sheriff's Department. And I told them who I was. And they said, "Yes, we just talked to your daughter." And she said, "You'd call." And I said, "What happened?" And they said, "Well, we received a notice of a missing person. And we've been investigating for a while." And they said that Mike had been murdered on April 21st of 2016, and that Cynthia had dismembered his body. And I said, "I'll be on a flight in the morning to Colorado to get his body and bring him back home," because I was thinking they had found his remains. And I said, "I'll be there in the morning. I'll get a flight out as soon as I can, and I'll be there to bring him back home." And they said, "Ma'am, there's nothing left, not even a fingernail."
Once an investigation ensued, it was determined that on April 26, 2016, two vehicles previously registered to Mike Brock were both transferred to Cynthia's name, and both titles used to provide the new registrations had described the vehicles as gifts. Jesse said that on May 27, 2016, Cynthia took possession of all Mike's assets, including having his home turned over into her name, which she eventually sold for $335,000. Mike Brock's phone number was disconnected in June of 2016, and his phone showed his last calls were between him and Wilkinson on April 20th, 2016, according to arrest document. Wilkinson continuously renewed Mike's driver's license and had even put some of her utilities in his name to make it look like Mike was still alive.
Since the moment we found out what had happened, and he told me that they had arrested Cynthia, and that Cynthia was charged with the murder and dismemberment and theft of $1 million and theft of Mike's home and theft of all of his assets, that she had put her name on his deed to his home. She had stolen his home and sold it. She had retitled all of his vehicles in her name, and that she had cleaned out his bank account, and there was nothing at all left of him except his laptop and his driver's license, which she was using to keep his driver's license renewed and to make charges and open credit card accounts and stuff in Mike's name.
Just to back up just a tiny bit, so when officers called, at any point did they mention finding any evidence as far as any trace of Mike's body, or did they just go off of what Cynthia told Jesse and Jesse told them?
Well, they knew that it had been a couple of years, and they went to the house that the new owners bought from Cynthia, and they sprayed luminol in the garage, and you could see where there was blood splatter in the garage. But she had already been arrested when this happened. They had enough evidence from Jesse, and they had evidently been following her for about 6 months. They had been, undercover officers were following her. They had tapped her phone. They had been in contact with Charles Gable, which was the man that helped cut the body up. When Mike was murdered, she tried to blame it on someone else. She tried to say Will Johnson did it.
And I freaked, and I'm screaming, Will. And he said, what's wrong? I said, I think he's dead. He said, well, I said, he's not moving. And I'm screaming at him right here. And I thought I was going to throw up. I run down the stairs, threw up in the kitchen area before I could even get to the bathroom. And I didn't know what to think. I mean, I'm just freaked out, paranoid at this time, because he's dead. And Will come up downstairs. He said, Cindy, don't call the authorities. What are you doing? And I said, he's dead. And he said, look at this place. He said, you can smell pot 2 miles down the road. He said, you call the police now. You just got out of prison. He said, you're going back. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I'll help you. He said, I'll help you through this. He said, but you're not calling the police. And I didn't know what, I just looked at him and I was freaked out. I couldn't breathe. I got the worst headache I ever had in my life. I didn't know what to think. And I just thought, I got to talk to Kathleen. I got to do something. And Will come. I remember him picking me up and he set me down in a chair and he said, stop. I'll handle this. And he went upstairs and he tied the blanket sheets together around him. And he had him on his shoulder and he walked down to the stairs and he said, I'm going to put you in the garage. He said, and we'll figure this out. Don't go anywhere. So I didn't. And I just sat right there and I thought, oh my God, I don't want to go to prison. I just got out. I don't know what to do with any of this. And I know now common sense says you call the authorities or you just walk away and then you go somewhere and have a house check or something. And then I will come back in and he said, let's get out of here.
Here is a snippet from investigators' interview with Charles Gable.
She had different versions.
Yeah. And that's when I was like, hey, what the fuck? This guy's duct taped and blindfolded. And I remember the conversation, like we're talking right here. And I'm like, what the fuck happened? And she wouldn't tell me, man. She wouldn't tell me.
Well, that would insinuate that obviously they transported him somewhere. So the question is, one of the questions is, was he blindfolded and duct taped before he died or after?
I don't see why you would duct tape and blindfold a dead person. I mean, that's just my assumption. I have no idea.
That's what you gathered from just the circumstances.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of a 2-part episode of the murder of Dereck Michael Brock. Coming up next on part 2 of the murder of Dereck Michael Brock.
She took his body from the house, left it in his little Subaru car on her friend's property where it rotted. Then she came back and got it and buried the body and dumped lime on it in a field.
Charles, we had a long conversation with Charlie. And he told us a lot of stuff that matches Jesse's story.
Let me just make it real simple. So we put him in the buckets after, well, she showed up at the storage with the body. She went up to Red Feather. Sooner or later I was up there, either that night or the day after. We chopped it up and we put it into the buckets. And we sealed the buckets. She put it under the porch. I went back down to Colorado Springs or Denver, I don't know exactly where I was at, but we got in a big old fight. Matter of fact, I was in the Springs. We got in a big old fight. She said she took care of everything. I don't have to worry about nothing.
How was he cut up?
I didn't know he was getting cut up until they showed me a video of Charlie saying that. Honest to God, I didn't know that. But Charlie said, I dismembered him.
Charlie says you were involved in his dismemberment and you were involved in his burial.
If you would like to help Mike Brock's family in their battle to regain Mike's property back, a GoFundMe has been set up by Mike's daughter Gail, and I will post that link on our Facebook page. I want to give a big thank you to Betty Belcher for taking the time to discuss Mike's case with me. I know this wasn't easy to relive, this whole tragedy, and my heart sincerely goes out to her and Mike's daughters. Thank you for listening to another episode of Gone in a Blink. We love to hear from you, so please consider following us on any of our social media sites. You can follow us on Facebook at Gone in a Blink or on Instagram at Gone in a Blink Pod. And if you have an idea for a show, please email us at goneinablinkpod@gmail.com. And to everyone out there, be safe, be smart, and try not to blink.